Hey, what is up guys? This is Nishi from MST.TV here, back with another Market Watch episode. So of course today we are taking a look at cards that are trending on the market after the YCS Pittsburgh weekend. Now there were a ton of great games and some interesting decks and strategies, but that said, I feel like it sort of confirmed what we felt about the format going into the event, with Mitsurugi Yummy and Branded Draco Tail very clearly being the two best decks of the format. That said, there weren't too many shakeups on the secondary market directly caused by the main event, but there were a ton of other things happening with Genesis and just other events overall that did cause a lot of volatility otherwise, and of course we're going to cover some of those main ones today as well. Let's get started. Okay, kicking things off, let's talk about the Fallen and the Virtuous. So this is a card that is always treated as both a Dogmatica and branded card, and it has two effects. The main one that's causing this card to see a ton of play is that you can send a monster that mentions Fallen of Albaz in its text from your extra deck to the graveyard to pop any face-up card on either side of the field. It does have another effect, where if you have an Ecclesia monster on the field or in your graveyard, you can special summon a monster from either player's graveyard. That's a much less relevant effect. So the Fallen and the Virtuous is something that saw a ton of competitive usage this past weekend at YCS Pittsburgh. Obviously, this is a card that can be used by the pure branded deck, but it was much more common to see this card being used in Branded Draco Tail. You could easily bring out an Albion and then fuse it off, and in the end phase you basically get access to a free destruction. The crazy thing is that if you use the Fallen and the Virtuous to send Albion the Branded Dragon to pop a card, you get to set another copy of this card during the end phase. And of course, popping something from either field is really good, since you can not just disrupt your opponent's combos, but you could also pop your own Arthalion to dodge a Veiler or Imperm, or maybe one of your spells in order to dodge Dracotail Flame. The other thing that we saw with this card is that it did get used a little bit in some Radiant Typhoon and Sky Striker decks. Of course, this is a quick play spell that you can discard for vision in either strategy if you need to, but it's also a free pop that is essentially able to replace itself through the aforementioned effect of Albion. Now that said, this weekend we saw all versions of the card jumping up in price. The biggest jump we saw was of course with the Starlight rares. These were around $80 to $100 or so, which does make sense after how much we saw the Blue Eyes Structured X Starlights tank in price eventually. However, this card has jumped all the way up to $170 per copy. I think the crazier thing to me is the secret rare version. This was another one where you had to get lucky with the upgrade in your structure deck, but it's a much better card to get upgraded than something like an Ecclesia. So the secret rare copies of the Fallen and the Virtuous were only $7 or so for a week or so there, but they're now up to $15 each, which is more than double in price. And then finally there is the Ultra that you should be able to just get from the structure deck itself. It's guaranteed in there. The whole thing goes for about 20 bucks if you don't care about the promo. Obviously there's other cards that are worth money like the alternate art thrust, but we've seen the Ultras go from $1.50 each to now being $3 each over the weekend as well. Definitely a fun card to take note of, especially if you're interested in playing Radiant Typhoon, Branded, Dracotail, maybe even Sky Striker. If you don't want to buy the Secrets or Starlights, you should at the very least make sure that you own a few copies of the ultra rare version available for yourself to use. Next up, we have a pretty interesting one here. We have Sky Striker Ace Zero. So I think the most unexpected piece of news that we got over the weekend was the announcement of the legendary modern decks. Basically, this is a box set that's coming out in March, and it's going to give us 3 competitive decks: Mitsurugi, Sky Strikers, and then for some reason X Sabers. Now we don't know too much about it, but we do know that the Sky Striker support that was previously only in the OCG is going to be in there. The most notable one being Camellia. Some cool stuff nevertheless. Zero is a fairly new card from Duelist's Advance, and it has actually already helped the Sky Striker deck out a lot, as we saw it make top 16 at YCS Pittsburgh. However, the timing of the release of the legendary decks actually puts players into a really tricky situation when it comes to Zero. Naturally, players have done what we expect them to do. This weekend, the announcement of Camellia has caused Zero to be bought out, going from $17 or $18 before to now being just under the $30 mark per copy. This is pretty fair, especially since the card basically just came out a few months ago, and normally you'd have from March until whenever the tins come out before the card would tank in price, so you could sell the card when the decks drop, at least to aim to maximize profit. However, at the same time, I think there's a decent chance that Konami could actually reprint Zero much earlier in the legendary decks themselves, and if they do, that would absolutely destroy a ton of the value that the secret rares are carrying. The Starlights, they haven't moved at around $150 a copy and they're staying pretty steady. They wouldn't get affected that much even with a reprint, but the secret rare copies, as technically the lowest rarity right now, would absolutely lose a good chunk of their value. That said, it's impossible for me to say whether you should buy Zero or sell it. If it gets reprinted, this card probably falls down to like $5, $10, but if it doesn't get reprinted, with how easy the rest of the cards will be to get, it honestly wouldn't surprise me to see Zero hit like $50 each, especially given how popular the deck is in general. With Zero, it'll probably depend on how much you manage to pick them up for. If you did pay a lot for them, or maybe you really want to play the deck, you're naturally more inclined to hold on to them. But if you're really risk averse, or maybe you only got them for like $5 or $6 each, it might actually not be a bad idea to cash out now and lock in those profits. Okay, so this is one I just want to touch on quickly. It's Secretary on Dragon. Now, I think we talked about this card last week, and even though it did spike, we said it was worth considering holding on to it just in case Dracotail overperformed at YCS Pittsburgh. Well, it turns out that's exactly what Dracotail did. Obviously, Dracotail won the entire event, but even past that, it felt like the deck was really just winning and representing at the same pace as Yummy Mitsurugi. Of course, Secretary on Dragon is an important monster for Dracotail to have access to in the extra deck. Not only is it an extender that Dracotail is easily able to make, but it's also something that can be really devastating to summon in the mirror match, so it's something you absolutely have to run. Now, unfortunately, however, the price spike with Secretary on Dragon maybe wasn't as notable as we might have hoped. The card was about $25 last week, but even with the success putting up a lot of attention on the cards, we only saw this card bump up a little bit to around $30 or $32 each. And then with the Starlights as well, it's a lot of the same thing. They were going for $80 to $85 before, and they're going for about $90 per copy now. I think that this actually tells us that we should be looking to sell Secretary on Dragon at the $30 mark. For it to go up even higher, it would have to all of a sudden be much better and perform better than Yummy Mitsurugi and just take up so much more event top cut representation. I don't really see that being the case. The other thing is that we do also have to remember that we only have the remote dual YCS and then we don't have any other events until the 300th in February. I guess the other thing we'd have to be a little bit careful of is if Yummy Mitsurugi were to get hit on the next ban list and Dracotail for some reason doesn't, then Dracotail could all of a sudden become the best deck of the format, and we could see Secretarion go up even further because of that additional demand. However, I don't really think that that's realistically going to happen. We'd probably see both decks hit pretty similarly. With that, you might want to hold on to one copy of Secretary on Dragon for your own personal use, and then move your extra copies while players are still extremely hyped up for the card after the YCS Pittsburgh win. So here's an interesting one. We have Malice March Hare. Now, Malice is kind of an odd deck in the current format. They have a ton of cards that are on the ban list right now, and they're weak to some very common disruptions, even something like Mulch Army Meows, which a lot more people are playing recently. However, the deck has actually been getting a lot of hype, not so much at YCS Pittsburgh, but rather at regionals over the couple of weekends prior to the YCS. Since no one is siding Artifact Lancia anymore, the deck is basically unaffected by Droll and Lockbird, and the deck can still make some really scary end boards. On top of that, they're also able to side Dimensional Fissure without consequence, and that's a pretty big floodgate against decks like Dracotail as well. Now, March Hare is something that has been steadily climbing in price over the last month or so. We were seeing them at about $17 to $18 recently, but they've actually jumped up in price a good bit, and there's only a couple of listings on TCG Player before you're going to have to pay $28 to $30 for a single copy. Aside from that, the QCR is holding pretty steady at around $45, though there are some weird listings when it comes to that version specifically. The thing about the rest of the deck is that it's just so accessible now. White Rabbit and Underground already got so much cheaper when they were semi-limited to 2, and now they also have those additional secret rare printings in the tins. It's just like the deck has gotten so easy to put together, and it has this really cool playstyle, so players are naturally gravitating more towards it now. March Hare is something that shouldn't be reprinted until the 2026 tins, so not until around autumn of next year, I think that in terms of being meta relevant, it's only generally going to be a medium, but all of the demand from players wanting to try the deck out now that it isn't as broken or overpowering anymore probably pushes it on up to high. In general though, I think the deck isn't nearly as strong as some of the other decks in the current format, so I would say hold on to a playset of this card if you want to keep the core together and have it available to play with, but definitely look to move your extra copies while the card is fresh off of a couple of weekends of hype. Okay, so just a quick one to look at here, not something I'm super familiar with. We have the Iris Sword Soul. So this card is a really odd one, being a Sword Soul monster, but not really synergizing with the deck all that well. During the main phase, as a quick effect, if there is a monster whose effect is negated on the field, you can special summon this card from your hand as a quick effect, and then if your opponent summons a monster, depending on where they summon a monster from, you can special summon one from your hand, you can draw 2 cards, or you can destroy one of their monsters that was special summoned from the extra deck. So obviously in Sword Soul, this card was never really used. I think some people tried to use it alongside Chi-Xiao, but it was never that great or saw that much competitive success. However, I believe that the card is now trending because of the Sword Soul related cards that are being revealed over in the OCG. Of course, there's the Fallen of Albaz connection in Burst Protocol, but they also have a new synchro called the 3 Brave Sword Souls. This card is kind of weird since I don't think it feels like a Sword Soul monster, but it's a cool card that can search for Iris, since Iris is a level 8 spellcaster with attack equal to its defense points, and then it also has the ability where it can negate the effect of a face-up card on the field, so potentially allowing you to bring out the very same Iris that you just searched for. That said, fortunately, Iris was reprinted in Rarity Collection 1, so you have a ton of easily accessible printings that you can go and pick up the card in, and they are cheap for the most part. In fact, even the Dawn of Majesty Secret Rares, which are the original printing, are coming in at only $1 each. However, it's the high rarity printings that are expensive. The Starlights went from $35 to $45, not too crazy, but the QCRs are the ones that went insane, going from $3 or $4 before to now being $18 to $20 a piece. Definitely a noteworthy jump, though I don't know if it's actually going to result in the card seeing that much competitive play. Either way, I'm not really sold on it, so I definitely think that you should move the QCRs and Starlights while they are currently so much up in price, and then just pick up a set of the card in one of the lower rarities at a much more reasonable price. And finally, the last card I want to talk about for today is Kaiba Man the Legend. Now, this card is actually from Duelist Advance, and it was one of the less popular secret rares in the set. This card is a piece of Blue Eyes support, obviously. The problem is that it requires you to play 3 copies of the vanilla Blue Eyes White Dragon in your deck. From there, on summon, you reveal that you're playing 3 copies, then you special summon one from your hand, deck, or graveyard, and then if this card is in your graveyard and you summon a Blue Eyes, you banish this card to search for a Blue Eyes monster from your deck to your hand. So in modern format, this hasn't been a particularly popular build of Blue Eyes. For the most part, they just play more of the Primite cards and then just 2 of the vanillas. However, it seems that Kaiba Man has gotten more popular over in Genesis format and is almost the standard, since Lordly Load costs 33 points while Kaiba Man costs 0. I haven't seen any of the deck lists come up myself, but apparently this has caused some huge movement with Kaiba Man's price. The secrets reached a low of about $7 to $8, not the worst, but they were only really worth something because Duelist Advance was so dirt cheap at like $30 a box, and people just wanted something to be of value in there. But over the last week or so, we've actually seen the secret rare versions of the card shoot all the way up to $20 each. The Starlights are interesting because they haven't really moved, and they are relatively cheap compared to the current price of the secret, going from $30 to $35. I don't know just how popular Blue Eyes is going to be in Genesis moving forward. I don't think they made top 8 at the Genesis Invitational at Pittsburgh, but given that this shouldn't be reprinted until next year's tins either, I do think it's worth trying to move the card while it is at an all-time high. However, down the road, if this card happens to settle down in price and fall to like $5 to $7, it might be worth picking up just in case a points adjustment happens to make Blue Eyes a more viable strategy. Alright guys, that is all I have for today's episode. Definitely great to meet a bunch of you at YCS Pittsburgh, but that is the last event of the year, unless you count the remote duel YCS, and then we have the 300th YCS, which is going to be in February of next year, which I am so excited to be going to. Anyways, guys, if you did enjoy today's market watch, please make sure you let me know by hitting that thumbs up button. Make sure you leave a comment in the comment section down below. Hit subscribe if you haven't already. And until next time, guys, don't forget to hold on to your MST.TV.